Do you remember that time Madonna wrote a children's book? The early 2000s felt like the golden age of girly media, with hundreds of books, movies, and magazines being dedicated to that very special time in a young woman's life. Adolescence wasn't treated as just a phase, but as something to be celebrated, not to mention, capitalized on. Celebrities love to start up a little side hustle, makeup lines, burger joints, low-calorie alcohol brands, but not many venture into children's publishing, so when they do, people take notice. Madonna had always been an expert at getting the public's attention, for better or for worse, and in the 2000s, she shocked fans by publishing not one, not two, but 6 children's books, the most popular of the bunch being The English Roses, which became a full-fledged franchise complete with tween-aged clothing, colorful flash games, legions of dedicated fans, and just a dash of religious indoctrination. So how did one of the most controversial women in pop history end up writing one of the best-selling children's books of the 2000s? And what's happened to the brand in the 20 years since? Let's get into it. To understand how The English Roses came to be, you first have to know what was going on in Madonna's life at the turn of the century. From the very start of her career, Madonna's public persona had been defined by scandal, with some even claiming that her success was because of her provocative imagery instead of genuine artistry. In the early 1990s, these criticisms escalated following the publication of her controversial coffee table book, Sex, the explicit themes and visuals of her album Erotica, and her risque acting roles in Body of Evidence and Dangerous Game. These exploits didn't go over well with the general public, resulting in lower sales than her previous projects, and Madonna spent the latter half of the decade actively trying to rehabilitate her image and regain her fan base. But try as she might, that negative reputation was pretty hard to shake. When the 2000s came around, it ushered in not just a new millennium, but a new sense of stability in her life, something that was attributed to her recent marriage to British film director Guy Ritchie. The two settled in the UK, splitting their time between the city and the countryside, and raising their children out of the spotlight, with the press even joking that Madonna had gone from a material girl to a maternal girl. This new identity brought with it more than just a change in residence, with Madonna trading her cone bras for suit sets, adopting a now infamous faux British accent, and exploring new creative ambitions.
You're sounding English, you know.
Am I?
Yes.
I mean, my accent.
Yeah, your accent. Yeah. Has anyone else said that to you?
When in Rome.
Yeah.
Well, I have an English husband and I have lots of English staff.
Back in 1995, while promoting her single, Bedtime Story, Madonna read David Kirk's children's book, Miss Spider's Tea Party, aloud to fans. The book's publisher, Nicholas Calloway, who had also assisted with the publication of Madonna's Sex, was in attendance. And seeing how the audience reacted to the reading, he begged Madonna to consider writing a children's book herself. Quote, "I thought then that she had an uncanny ability to tell a story, but year after year, she declined." It wasn't until she'd settled in her life in London that she finally considered his offer, and in early 2003, she announced that she'd signed a 5-book publishing deal with Calloway Arts and Entertainment. Although Madonna had been presenting herself in a more down-to-earth way over the last few years, this career pivot still raised eyebrows, as she wasn't exactly parents' first choice for an inspiring role model for their children. Madonna acknowledged how difficult it was to get people to take her seriously as an author. Quote, "Celebrity is an advantage and a disadvantage. It's an advantage because I have a built-in audience, people know who I am and they pay attention to what I do and what I say. But it's also a disadvantage because people have preconceived notions about what I should or shouldn't be doing. They think, she's a pop star. What business does she have writing children's books? But at the end of the day, I'm a mother, and who better to write a children's book?"
All right, but it happened, and I'm here to tell you that I kissed 2 different girls. But anyway, let's talk about my book.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about marriage for a second.
We're talking about my children's book.
Oh, good. I love. All right, in your children.
Thank you.
Great. In your children's book, you dedicate.
Aware that people weren't very open to the idea of Madonna, the children's book author, publishers kept things hush-hush for as long as possible. And it wasn't until September 15th, 2003, that the first of these books, The English Roses, was released to the public. The story introduced 4 11-year-old schoolgirls, Nicole Rissman, Amy Brooke, Charlotte Ginsberg, and Grace Harrison. The quartet of best friends do absolutely everything together, including openly resenting another girl at school, Bina Rossi. Consumed by jealousy towards Bina's intelligence and beauty, the English Roses complain endlessly about their own lives while seething over what they perceive as Bina's charmed existence. One night during a sleepover, the four girls dream about a fairy godmother who takes them on a journey into Bina's life, revealing that her circumstances are far from ideal. Her mother is dead, she's responsible for all the cooking and cleaning in her household, and she has no toys or friends. Confronted with this harsh reality, the girls are overwhelmed with guilt and are filled with gratitude for their own lives. When they wake up, they resolve to stop complaining and to treat Bina with kindness. And the book ends with Bina finally being welcomed into the group, becoming the fifth English Rose. The inspiration for the book came from Madonna's life and the life of her daughter, Lourdes, whose group of friends were actually referred to as the English Roses by their teachers, hence the title. The book's overarching message against bullying and gossip was influenced by Lourdes' school experience, with Madonna saying, quote, "She would come back and tell me that people were treating her differently or saying things to her because she was my daughter." Lourdes also served as an unofficial advisor during the book's development, helping pick the illustrations, the characters' interests, and crucially, letting her mother know when the story was too boring.
My daughter is kind of she's my cohort when I'm writing, because I write like a rough draft and then I go and I read it to her and she's like, boring, boring. Mom, I don't get that. Oh, I like that part.
Although the book's themes may have been inspired by her child, Bina essentially served as a stand-in for Madonna herself, being blonde, beautiful, and terribly misunderstood. Similar to Bina, Madonna's mother had passed away when she was young, and her insecurities about the situation were reflected in the English Roses' mistreatment of Bina. Quote, "As a child, I experienced jealousy and envy towards other girls for any number of reasons. I was jealous they had mothers, jealous they were prettier and richer.
I've also been the other girls, too, in my school, and I've been incredibly jealous of the girl with naturally blonde hair that everyone's besotted by. So, I think in the end I relate to all of the characters, but mostly Bina."
In interviews, Madonna positioned the English Roses as being better for young girls than traditional fairy tales. Quote, "The women in Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty or Snow White are really passive. They don't move the plot along at all. They just show up, they're beautiful, they get snapped up by the princes tell them they want to marry them, and then they go off and live happily ever after." I'd read to the end and I'd say, wait a minute, nobody asked her what she wanted. Banking on Madonna's celebrity factor to drive sales, the English Roses was launched in 100 countries in 42 different languages, which was an unprecedented rollout for a debut author. Although there were some initial concerns about the book's sales potential, in large part because it was released only a few weeks after Madonna's infamous 2003 VMAs performance, where she kissed Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera.
It was just a friendly kiss.
But all of that worry was for naught, as within the first month of publication, The English Roses had sold 500,000 copies worldwide, and by the end of its first year, over 1 million. This broke records in the children's literature space, and The English Roses was put on bestseller lists right alongside the likes of Harry Potter and The Princess Diaries.
Do you prefer my books to Harry Potter books?
I like prejudice.
Critical reception, however, was far more mixed. Most reviewers praised the book's intentions, but said that it faltered in its execution, saying that the writing was rather simplistic, and the characters, in particular the four English Roses, had very little that distinguished them from one another. Some people also took issue with the illustrations by Geoffrey Fulvimari, arguing that the elongated limbs and stylized proportions could potentially promote an unhealthy body image to young readers. But the most common complaint was that, like most celebrity side hustles, it felt like a cash grab, with one critic saying, quote, "It seems like a symptom of desperation. Maybe being happy in her personal life as a wife and mother is putting her in a creative drought. She's lapsed, her presence is receding, and she's facing the dilemma of the aging star." Madonna didn't have time to take these criticisms to heart, however. After all, she had 4 more books to promote. Mr. Peabody's Apples told the story of a young boy who spreads unfounded rumors, only to learn how impossible it is to undo the damage once it's been done. Then there was Yakov and the 7 Thieves, which followed a sick boy who can only be healed if a group of sinners repent and pray to open the gates of heaven. There was The Adventures of Abdi, which centered on a boy tasked with delivering a necklace to the royal palace, but after the necklace is stolen and Abdi is punished, his master's honesty ultimately leads to the two being rewarded. Finally, there was Lazza di Cascia, which featured a wealthy Italian greyhound who loses his riches and learns that money can't buy happiness. The themes of the books were heavily influenced by Madonna's studies of Cabala, a form of Jewish mysticism that she had embraced in the late 1990s, right around the time she was rehabilitating her image.
Now, how did you become involved in this?
A girlfriend of mine was going all the time, and she kept telling me about this really charismatic rabbi named Eitan who told these great stories. And it's a belief system. It's incredibly scientific, and as I said, it predates religion. I think people, a lot of the rituals, all of the rituals have been appropriated by the Jewish faith. But I think people have misinterpreted or have left out the true and deep metaphysical reason for all of those things.
She cited these teachings as the real reason for her foray into children's publishing, saying, quote, "The inspiration initially came from my teacher who I studied Cabala with. He suggested, why don't you write children's books and share the wisdom that you've gained as an adult? It seemed like an out-of-left-field idea because I'd never dreamed in a million years that I'd be doing something like that. But the more I reflected on it, I thought this is a kind of cool challenge for me."
There's nothing glamorous about writing children's books. There's nothing cool about writing children's books.
It's hard to write a children's book.
Yeah, it is, and I thought, okay, I'm up for that challenge. That's an interesting idea, so.
Similar to how Tom Cruise was the famous face of Scientology, Madonna had become the celebrity spokesperson for Cabala, and she made a point of promoting the practice and the Los Angeles-based Cabala Center as often as she could. This included incorporating Cabala imagery into her music and concerts, endorsing the center's overpriced string bracelets and blessed water, going on high-profile excursions to Israel, and even attempting to recruit other celebrities like Demi Moore, the Beckhams, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Britney Spears.
I'm a little bit irritated that people think that it's like some celebrity bandwagon that I've jumped on.
The Cabala Center itself was quite controversial, in large part because of its commercialization of the tradition, its prioritization of its celebrity members, and its rather steep fees, all of which led to it not being recognized by any major religions as a legitimate practice, with Jewish scholar Emanuel Shoshet even labeling it as a dangerous cult. But in typical Madonna fashion, she chose to make light of these criticisms, even wearing cheeky t-shirts that said cult member while attending Cabala events. Although Calloway insisted that Madonna had written all of the books herself, rumors spread that Eitan Yardeni was the actual author, as he'd ghostwritten other books for those involved with the Cabala Center. Many parents, educators, and religious scholars were uneasy about spiritual indoctrination being packaged as children's entertainment, with cult expert Rick Ross saying, quote, "It's just pushing Cabala down the throats of innocent children." Besides the books being another tool for Madonna to spread the word of Cabala, their proceeds also went to organizations affiliated with the Cabala Center. One of these programs was the Spirituality for Kids Foundation, which Madonna had actually enrolled Lourdes into. Quote, "I've noticed a profound change in her. She's become more loving and much more aware of her behavior and how it affects the world around her. I only wish I had been exposed to understanding the laws of the universe when I was a kid. I could have saved myself a lot of pain and suffering." Out of the 5 books, The English Roses was by far the most successful, perhaps because it was the only story that took place in modern times, or because it didn't feel quite as preachy as the rest of the lineup, or because it was the only book with female characters, the demographic that had the most overlap with Madonna's existing fanbase. Either way, it was clear that The English Roses had the most potential for growth, as hyper-feminine, friendship-focused brands as a whole were booming.
Wow, we look hyper cool. You know it. I guess growing up isn't so bad after all. Not if it means getting a new wardrobe.
In 2004, a year after the book's publication, Calloway launched accompanying merchandise, including dolls and clothing. The clothes were stereotypically youthful and girly, but I personally don't think that Jeffrey Fulvimari's art style translated well to 3-dimensional figures, with the dolls looking like weird, off-brand groovy girls. The fashion doll market was pretty oversaturated at the time with the likes of Bratz, My Scene, Diva Stars, and Polly Pocket, and The English Roses just couldn't compete aesthetically. Even their website was less entertaining, being limited to quizzes and point-and-click games, and a few years later, the merchandise quietly disappeared, leaving little trace beyond a handful of promotional images. Around the same time, Madonna expressed an interest in adapting the story into an animated film, one that would perhaps star Britney Spears as Bina and Madonna as the fairy godmother. Now, wouldn't that have been something?
It's now being made into a movie.
The success of them of The English Roses has just completely blown me away, and I'm so thrilled.
Turning one of her best-selling children's books into a major motion picture event.
Movies? I mean, these things have a great plot for movies, don't you think?
Who knows? I mean, I've been approached by some people about it, and I'm thinking about it.
I personally think a live-action format would have worked better, especially considering the success of The Princess Diaries and The Cheetah Girls, but in the end, plans for an English Roses movie never went ahead, perhaps because of what happened next. On October 24th, 2006, Madonna released the second installment of The English Roses, Too Good to Be True.
And now I'm writing a sequel to The English Roses, and she insisted that there was a boy in it.
Set roughly a year after the first book, this time, the conflict revolved around Dominic, a Spanish exchange student. 4 of the 5 English Roses develop a crush on him, but after discovering that he's interested in Bina, they're bitten by the big green monster of jealousy. Bina once again finds herself on the outs, but after attending a school dance, the girls reconcile and vow to be friends forever. Back when The English Roses was published in 2003, it was a novelty, but 3 years and 4 books later, the public was a little less amused by Madonna's writing exploits, and being in the midst of yet another scandal certainly didn't help her case either. Around the time Too Good to Be True was set to be released, Madonna and Guy Ritchie had initiated the adoption of a 13-month-old Malawian boy named David.
I love babies, but I especially love getting babies from crazy places. And Malawi is pretty much the most exotic place in the world to get a baby. A fancy, spicy brown baby.
This sparked immediate backlash, with critics accusing Madonna of using her wealth to fast-track the process and raising questions about whether David's biological father understood what he was signing up for. They attempted to turn things around by presenting Madonna as a wholesome mother figure, particularly by focusing on her connection to her adopted son's home country. She went on a Malawi promo tour with book in hand, and promised that the proceeds of Too Good to Be True would be donated to Raising Malawi, an organization that she had founded alongside Cabala Center director Michael Berg. But by that point, it was too late. All of the goodwill that Madonna had spent the last decade building torpedoed, and Too Good to Be True had significantly worse sales than its predecessor, selling only 9,000 copies in the first month compared to the original's 500,000. But I suppose that isn't too surprising, considering parents probably aren't going to want to buy your book if tabloids are accusing you of buying children. Perhaps recognizing that her involvement was doing more harm than good, Madonna took a step back from the franchise in 2007. But that wasn't the end of The English Roses, and Calloway proceeded to publish 12 additional chapter books co-written by other authors, although Madonna's name was still featured prominently on the cover. The series continued to explore adolescent problems like playground gossip, family feuds, and growing pains, but in a slightly more mature way than the first 2 installments, even aging the characters up to the 8th grade to be more appealing to the tween demographic. Madonna's lack of input was pretty apparent in the direction of these new stories. Bina was no longer prioritized, with the books exploring the rest of the English Roses' personalities and home lives, and the Cabala teachings were replaced with more generic moral issues. There's no information on how well this new direction performed, but I'd guess poorly, since Calloway eventually pulled the plug on The English Roses in 2010. But Madonna didn't seem to care about the failings of a project she had once described as, quote, the most fun that I've had on all the things I've done creatively, probably because she was too busy in other aspects of her personal and professional life at the time, like her clothing line with H&M, her divorce from Guy Ritchie, her adoption of another child from Malawi, and the worldwide success of her album, Hard Candy. Nowadays, Madonna rarely acknowledges the time in her life where she identified as a children's book author, and The English Roses will likely be nothing more than a footnote in her career. But it's interesting to look back at how important it once was to her and thousands of little girls, even if its main goal was just to funnel money and interest into a questionable religious organization. Do you remember The English Roses? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!